Good morning and welcome to Great Tree Zen Women's Temple. Our speaker this morning is Genjo Trey Williams, one of our very own. And yay! And Tejo, would you do the opening sutra, please?
An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
Now, brief message on dana. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely. And this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit about speaking of the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And Tejo, Trey, Donna this morning can go to
Pray.
To Great Tree, please.
I can go to the Great Tree Practice Fund, which will help get some bowls for Trey.
Thank you.
All right. Our speaker, Genjo Trey Williams, has been studying and practicing Zen Buddhism for several years. He recently graduated with his MA in clinical mental health counseling from Lenoir-Rhyne University and currently works as a psychotherapist in Asheville, North Carolina. He is interested in the ways that spiritual practice, mental health, and social justice interact and support our well-being. Good morning, Genjo.
Good morning. Thanks, Lorna. Thanks, y'all, for being here. I want to apologize for my voice and for the scratchiness and the throat clearing that will probably happen throughout. Just woke up feeling a little sick, and I kind of figured it would happen this summer because I've been working at a summer camp with a bunch of little kids, among other things. And so I think the pace and also just, hanging out with kids was only a matter of time. And, I was there yesterday and we were playing outside. I was with the kindergartners, the rising first graders. And, a kid runs up to me and he's snot actively dripping down his nose. And he hands me a little rocket ship to play with. And, I had this thought that came up. I was like, this is the moment when I get sick, so I don't know how much my thinking played a part in that and just the interaction, but so I apologize. And, Tejo asked me to speak and asked me then what I'd like the title of my talk to be. And so I was thinking, I don't know. So let me just kind of come up with something. And I thought, I'm really interested in psychology and in Western psychology. And that's what I've been studying for the past couple of years at Lenoir-Rhyne. I'm really interested in how Buddhism and Western psychology support one another. And so I figured, okay, well, let me talk about that because it will give me kind of some it'll kind of encourage me to really look at that closely. And then another thing I've been doing this summer is I've been part of a group that's been studying and experimenting with and playing with a framework to psychology and counseling called relational cultural theory. And until recently, until I really started studying psychology, I just kind of figured, and counseling really in particular, that it's all the same. You kind of meet with a counselor and you get kind of this cookie cutter same thing, which of course was just an idea and was not real. And there are all types of different approaches to counseling and theories and frameworks. And so one that I'm really interested in is this relational cultural theory. So I've been fortunate to have a group that I've been with looking at the concepts and playing with them and really trying to practice them this past month and a half to see what happens, to see how our life changes and what comes up, which similar to my Buddhist practice, the first kind of several years of my practice was a little bit of practice. I would sit, but really it was more study, and it was very intellectual, and I read a lot. And then, I'm stubborn and slow to learn and very self-reliant to a fault. And so, of course, I was reading all about the importance of a teacher and a sangha. And I was like, well, yeah, okay, but I'm just going to sit and see and read my books. And then, of course, eventually years later, I realized like, oh, no, that's important. And so I moved back to Asheville, and I'm so fortunate and grateful to have Great Tree here and to have Tejo and the teachings and to have Tejo as a teacher and y'all as a sangha. And it's great to be here among sangha and among big sangha, right? There are people here in the Zoom room from different kind of sanghas in my life coming together, which is always sweet. So relational cultural theory, it came about and was created by a group of women in the late 70s, early 80s, who were really challenging this notion in psychology, the dominant kind of thinking about psychology, created mostly by men, that we grow through and toward like individuation and autonomy. And they were kind of these women, these scholars were really challenging that and kind of questioning that, and propose that actually we really grow through and toward relationship and connection, and that it's actually our ability to be open and in relationship that contributes to our well-being. And that really resonated with me. Been studying and practicing Buddhism for a little bit, and I thought, well, yeah, that's interconnectedness. And I think so much of my practice is returning to that, the interconnectedness, to the impermanence, and letting go of the idea I have and the beliefs that I'm an individual self and I need to do everything by myself, and kind of shutting myself out of interconnectedness. And can't remember who said it. I was at a celebration last November. This comes up a lot for me. I was at a celebration last November, celebrating 100 years of Soto Zen being in North America. And a couple of the teachers, Reverend Shohaku Okumura and Reverend Reb Anderson, talked about the precepts, the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. And a part of this celebration was receiving and accepting and giving the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. So I received the precepts. And so they gave a talk on kind of their perspective on what they are. And I can't remember if it was Reb Anderson or Shohaku Okumura who said that as long as we remember and act in accordance to interconnectedness and impermanence, we uphold all the Bodhisattva precepts. And I thought, yeah, the tricky part is remembering and letting go of my habits of forgetting that truth, interconnectedness. And I was trying to look for my notes so I could really let you know who said it. And I'm moving right now. I'm in the process of moving out of my house, and so my life's kind of in disarray. And I think that I threw my notes away. And that was a sad realization for me. So Tejo was there, so I don't know if Tejo remembers that, who said it. But yeah, so as part of this group studying relational cultural theory, RCT for short, relational cultural theory becomes kind of a mouthful when you say it a lot. So RCT, one of the founding scholars, Janet Surrey, is an insight meditation teacher. And part of our study this past summer was we used one of her texts that she's written called Relational Psychotherapy, Relational Mindfulness. And I'll put into the chat, there's a PDF version you can access. And it's written for kind of clinicians and psychologists and therapists, but I think it's really, it's written in a way that I think it's not too jargony, I don't think. And I think she explains concepts well. And that was another thing about RCT that attracted me, is the accessibility of it, because we were all in relationship all the time. And so really more than anything, it gave me language to what I was experiencing, which helped me understand myself better and ultimately let go of things that weren't supporting this interconnectedness. One of the Bodhisattva precepts, one of the translations is to embrace and benefit all beings. And that kept coming up for me these past couple of weeks as I was preparing for this talk. What do I mean by practice? What is our practice? And really, what is my practice? Everyone's practice, I think, is different. And for me, I think that was really core, to embrace and benefit all beings. And, which then led me to, okay, how do I do that? And then led me to the Eightfold Path. We've got these frameworks, that's the good thing. People have been studying and living and practicing for thousands and thousands of years, and frameworks have been passed down and guiding principles that we can learn from and practice and see how they show up. But, that's another question I have, is part of, the Eightfold Path is right action, right speech, right livelihood, right mindfulness. This right is translated as right. In Pali, it's sama. And Tejo talks about it as harmonizing. So maybe a different translation. It's one of the translations. So to harmonize with all beings. Because of course, right sets up kind of a duality of right and wrong. It can. And so practicing that non-duality. But yeah, then the question is like, how do I know what's right, if what I'm doing is right? And I guess that's where the practice part comes in, of just kind of living it and seeing what works. And so that came up. And so these frameworks exist, and this language and these concepts to help and guide us. And I think that's where Western psychology is really beneficial too. It helps give language to the experience. And so we've been using this text, Relational Psychotherapy, Relational Mindfulness. And in it, Janet Surrey, she talks about the three poisons at one point. I think she defines them as greed, hatred, and delusion. And she says that these can be understood as habitual psychological or behavioral patterns that lead to disconnection, that I think means that lead to us forgetting our interconnectedness or interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh says. And I was thinking, like, yeah, that's kind of samsara, right? Our habits or our patterns, this kind of cycle. And so she talks about it from a kind of very relational standpoint. And she talks about in relational cultural theory in RCT, there've been just, well, really four, but three or four movements in relationship that we can do as human beings and that we do generally. And they're moving toward relationship, moving away from relationship, moving against relationship, and moving with relationship. And so the first three, she connected to the three poisons. And so moving toward relationship, she described as kind of creating greed and acting out of greed. And this moving toward actually means kind of clinging to a relationship, so much so that we leave parts of ourselves out, and we'll do anything, it's kind of a grasping anxiety. We'll do anything to maintain the relationship and to stay in it, so long as we don't lose it, even if it's hurting us, even if we're not able to bring our full selves. And then there's moving against. This one she connected to the poison of hatred, or aversion, sometimes it's translated. And this is when our reaction is one of anger or criticism, judgment, resentment, blaming. And then moving away, she connected to delusion. And moving away is going silent, withdrawing, ghosting someone, right? Just kind of exiting the relationship without saying anything, without meeting and coming together. Intellectualizing can be a form of moving away. I was thinking about the ways these show up in my life, and depending on the relationship, I'll have different strategies. And how moving with is kind of the antidote in RCT, being willing to open up to the relationship, even when it's scary, even when it requires some vulnerability. And she says, it's often most difficult to be with this suffering of someone, the suffering of someone you love or for whom you feel responsible, and almost unbearable to stay with this when you are seen as the source of the problem. And so that's when I think, for me, I noticed, all my tendencies and habits come up of disconnecting, of forgetting the interconnectedness, which I think is good, becoming aware of it. Because then we have agency, right? Then we can choose, which I think is one of the benefits of the practice, is just kind of waking up and seeing the ways that we act out our own suffering, which creates more suffering. And when we can see it, we can disrupt it if we want to. Then at least we're choosing. Even if we choose to continue to be in it and be in our patterns, it's still a choice. And that we can always return, right? And sometimes these are necessary, I think, too. It's not also to say these are always bad, but to just recognize that sometimes they're necessary for our survival. In RCT, they're called strategies of disconnection or survival. And so recognizing that we all, at some point in our lives, they're really necessary, and they came about through survival strategies we pick up usually as kids or just throughout our lives that become necessary at certain times, but then maybe are not necessary, but then we get stuck in them. And yeah, I think seeing them helps to let them go for me. I was thinking about letting go in this process of Zazen and sitting down and kind of letting go of doing anything. Tejo says resisting the urge to do anything, which was really hard for me. You know, for so many reasons, I can come up with 1,000,001 excuses why I should be doing something, which of course is just part of spinning that wheel. But yeah, then when we do that, we get to just kind of see this play out. I've heard it described as like watching the movie instead of kind of participating in it. And I was thinking about letting go and how hard it is. Even when I really want to let something go, sometimes I still can't. Or when I'm in a situation, it comes back up and I'm just acting out of my patterns and habits again. But every time we see it, it kind of becomes easier to let go. And then I think the deeper that we see it, the more it kind of releases. And I've had moments sitting in Zazen and kind of spinning my wheel and then getting to see that and really see the root of it and be like, wow, like that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm attaching to create this, and how that helps to release it. And I think therapy can do a similar thing. You're sitting across from a therapist. I think of it kind of as a mirror, and hopefully their mirror is really clean and they can just reflect clearly, if that's even possible. I don't know that there's any such thing as a super clear mirror, but at least a mirror where you know where the smudges are, so you know when you're distorting. And how, like, yeah, I've been working with a therapist for the past couple of years, and he knows me really well. And yeah, he'll just reflect things that are like, oof, that's exactly what I'm doing and exactly what's happening. And it helps to let it go. And the same is true for a friend, teacher, someone who really cares about us enough to see us and can see us clearly. In RCT, these are called growth fostering relationships. So, all right, in preparing for this, I was like reading a lot and doing a lot of research, and what that usually looks like for me is just writing down a bunch of quotes. So I've got a lot of great quotes. Not really necessarily sure how they all connect. But I was reading The Light That Shines Through Infinity by Katagiri Roshi. It was Tejo's teacher. And he's got a chapter on the human mind. And what he says, he's comparing Buddhism and psychology. And what Katagiri Roshi says is, when you see the term human mind, immediately you ask what it is. What compels you to ask? It is your own human mind. Your human mind wants to possess something as a concept, which becomes human knowledge. For this, Western psychology is a very useful science by which we study human life and the individual self from a particular angle. But no matter how hard you try to understand human life by mastering concepts, still it's very difficult to pin down the total picture of human life. In Buddhism, we also study human life and the individual self. So there is a kind of Buddhist psychology. We analyze the human mind, trying to learn what consciousness is and how our minds are working. So it is psychology. But on the other hand, our final goal is not to understand the human mind. It is to be free from the human mind, So simultaneously, it is not psychology. So there's kind of that duality and non-duality piece. And yeah, I thought I underlined that from that particular angle, he says, where Western psychology helps us view this from a particular angle. And so we're kind of getting all these different angles on the human mind. And I was thinking like that part about Buddhism as kind of a psychology. And there have been many different schools and teachers over the years, I think all the way from Shakyamuni Buddha, who have talked about the mind and come up with all these different descriptions of consciousness. But I think that's what it is, in Zazen, we kind of sit and watch. And what better way to learn about the mind than to just be with it and watch it. In Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Suzuki Roshi says, even though you try to put people under control, it is impossible. You cannot do it. The best way to control people is to encourage them to be mischievous. Then they will be in control in a wider sense. To give your sheep or cow a large, spacious meadow is a way to control him. So it is with people. First, let them do what they want and watch them. This is the best policy. To ignore them is not good. That is the worst policy. The second worst is trying to control them. The best one is to watch them without trying to control them. And so he's talking about people and cows and sheep, but I think he's also maybe talking about the mind. And how actually just letting go of our thinking and just letting it do what it does, it's a kind of freedom. I asked Tejo, what are thoughts? Where do they come from? And you said, they're secretions of the mind, the way that our stomach secretes bile. Our stomach, I don't know what our stomach secretes, gastric juices, all types of things, right? And so they're just there, and I can really try to control it. And I have these ideas of Zazen and the mind. I have to not think. Dogen Zenji says, think of not thinking. How do you think of not thinking? Non-thinking. And just letting it do what it does, without trying to fix it or control it or change it or limit it, controlling it by letting it do whatever it wants to do. Someone I was talking to recently who had really struggled with mindfulness for a long time and just couldn't do it. They're like, it's not for me. I don't get it. They were experiencing something challenging, and I thought, well, let me try mindfulness again. I think they were in the midst of a lot of anger. And they said they listened to a guided instruction, and the instruction said, just let your mind wander. And that really clicked for them. And I thought, yeah, that's good advice, because if, I can definitely have a tendency to sit, right, and just keep spinning the cycle. I think of like a hamster wheel, just running around my hamster wheel. And it takes stopping for that stillness to occur, just letting this wheel still spin, right? I had hamsters growing up, and we'd watch it run. Its name was Papillon because it was I guess there's a famous escape artist. My sister named it, and it was really good at getting out of the cage. And but I'd watch it, right? And it would just run around the wheel and run and run and run. And then it would trip or stop, but still be on the wheel. And so it wouldn't be moving, but the wheel would still be spinning. So this kind of effort turned into like maybe this fun ride, right? And that's kind of how the mind is sometimes. If we could stop running and fueling it and just kind of go for the ride, it's a very different experience. And then Janet Suri says something really, sorry, I'm just looking through my notes, I liked about mindfulness. She said, mindfulness is conscious silence that envelops an inexpressible, all-encompassing relational world in which we are all connected. And so returning to the mindfulness is returning to our interconnectedness. I'm thinking just letting go of those habits we have. If we want to, right? And if we can see them. So I think, yeah, and thinking about this, I think, psychology, Buddhism, they give us really helpful concepts and language to play with and to practice, and to see what happens. And the same is true for anything. I think anything, if we're open to it, can help us get free and see ourselves. Like I think astrology language helps me a lot. And it's not even that I believe that the planets are controlling our lives. I just think it's a reflection. And so that language is helpful for seeing myself and others. Yeah. And how in that seeing, just that awareness is kind of liberation. Mark Epstein, he's a Buddhist and a psychotherapist up in New York. He said awareness is self-liberating. Like just seeing it, seeing the way our minds work and seeing the way, seeing ourselves is really freeing. Coming back to that agency piece. Yeah. And how that's what we get to do in relationship and Zazen. Yeah, it's all an opportunity to see ourselves and yeah, notice our habits and notice what we can create in the world. And the mindfulness piece, I was in reading up on kind of Buddhist psychology. Katagiri Roshi in The Light That Shines Through Infinity talks about the Yogacara school of Buddhism and how they really mapped out consciousness. And they came up with kind of 8 levels of consciousness. And the first 5 are the sense organs: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling. And I think those are kind of like portals, right? They're how we receive the world, and then how we give the world back. And so there's this kind of interaction that happens, and then that gives rise, or co-arises maybe with the mind consciousness and the self. And then the 2 other 7 and 8 are these unconscious consciousnesses that I don't really understand, so I'm not going to try to talk about them, but I encourage you to look them up, or if you to share any insights you have. But I guess coming back to the question of yeah, how Western psychology, Buddhism, how they interact and support each other. I don't know. It's a question, right? And I know for me, I think I come back to, yeah, the way they can reflect the world, and reflect ourselves and help us see. And with RCT, that interconnectedness is really there. and impermanence, and thinking about going back to the strategies of disconnection, the moving away, the moving against, the moving toward. I think they're all rooted kind of in fear, a fear of loss. We're afraid we're going to lose something, or something's going to end or die. All of these are kind of synonyms: loss, change, even death, ending, or fear that the relationship will end. So we move toward it, even when it's not healthy, or we're not able to really be our full selves. There are things we say that we can't, for fear of losing it, and maybe being alone, we move towards it. And then maybe fear of the ideas we have about ourselves, when that gets challenged in relationship, and rather than accept it, we move against it, we fight it, we defend ourselves and use anger and blame and criticism to avoid really looking at that. And then moving away, that once again, that fear of loss. What will happen if we say this thing? In RCT, it's that there's this concept of the one true thing. So saying the one true thing you can. Especially, I think about it, especially with someone maybe you're struggling with, or yourself, and at Great Tree, we've been doing these full moon ceremonies, these repentance ceremonies, and they've been really lovely and hard, honestly. I encourage you to come and see what I mean. But one of the invitations is to think of someone you're struggling with and say one thing you really appreciate about them. And I think of that one true thing, and that's been really helpful, to kind of take a step back. And then it's always back to us, right? It's we're struggling with this person because of our own stuff, and what the things that we're attaching to, and the things we like and don't like, and our attachment to our likes and dislikes, wanting things to go our way. And so it's helpful, that piece. I was experiencing a lot of conflict in my workplace recently, and I was really wrapped up in it. And one of the most helpful questions I got, Tejo, was like, well, what, conflict just arises because of what we're attaching to. And I was like, oh no. But I'm not doing anything wrong, of course. But then that, reflecting on, how am I contributing to this, and what outcome do I want that's not there? Dukkha, the dissatisfaction with the situation. It was really helpful in letting it go and seeing it. And I think the same is in when we go into protect mode, which is necessary sometimes and can cut us off from relationship and relationality. And relationship, I think, in its most broad sense, not just with other people, but relationship with the world and the universe, and the cushion, the computer. We're constantly in relationship, but we can forget that because of past experiences and protection. In RCT, it becomes problematic when it becomes fixed. It's called condemned isolation in RCT. This idea that we're disconnected from the whole world, and there's nothing that can bring us back into connection. And how the antidote is to remember that we are interconnected. But yeah, it's that fear there that is protective and can also keep us stuck. So I think I'll stop there. It's about 10:40, and just open it up for discussion, thoughts, questions, conversation. I appreciate y'all sitting through my ramblings, still processing this, and I'd love to hear from you if you have anything to say.
Thanks, Trey. Really enjoyed being here this morning. I'm so glad. The powerful metaphor for me is the hamster wheel when it stops. And really appreciate you bringing in that story. I can really feel it in my body. And also about this bringing in space and seeing the category Roshi, the big field with the cows and the sheeps and me, instead of trying to control, bringing out the field. And that's really alive in me too this morning. I did wonder if there's been a teaching from the little ones with your relational experience that you might share. Peggy bowing out.
Thanks, Peggy. Yeah, so many gifts and wisdom from the little ones. I'm working with rising first graders to rising sixth graders. So just seeing the progression is one teaching. And but I was thinking about it, and there's such a immediacy in a lot of the kids, and like a presence, even when, and like a shamelessness or a lack of fear, or not with all of them, but a lot of them, especially the younger ones, of needing to be seen as a certain way. And it's like, and if I'm upset about something with the kid, whether, and my perception oftentimes is like, it's so small. I didn't get to eat my flaming hot Cheetos, or, little conflicts everywhere. He didn't share the sandbox cup to make the castle, and these explosions, right? They get so mad, and they're just so in the experience. And then, a minute later, they're fine. There's nothing left. Sometimes I even ask them of like, what happened earlier? What was up? Let's learn from that. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And because there's nothing else left. They released it all. They're not carrying anything with them, I think, because they're in it, and they let it be what it is, and then it's gone into the next moment. So that, I see that a lot. And then the love they have for each other, and the compassion. A lot of, there are 6 different classrooms, and at the end, many of the classrooms do a closing circle, and they kind of reflect, what was your highlight, what was your low light. And oftentimes the low point is when one of the students in the class, even if it wasn't them, was struggling and was having a meltdown. A lot of times it's like, I was really concerned, and I didn't like, it was low to see my friend and classmate struggling like that. And then when someone, oftentimes when a student leaves the class and is crying, all the other students gather around, and they're like, what's wrong? Are you okay? There's just this concern and this care that sometimes is not welcome from the student who's crying. They're like, just leave me alone, but that care and concern is there. And then each classroom has like kind of a little mini nervous system. It's you can kind of see once you step into them, the Sangha and how they interact with each other and affect one another. And how one student is off, it kind of ripples through the classroom, because there are these little contained ecosystems. It's cool. And I think the same is true for us,
I appreciate you using that illustration of the cows and the goats and the field, because I've read that and I've read that and I had no idea what that meant until you brought in the fact that he's probably referring to our minds, not just the field of things. I'm going, oh yeah, thank you. That makes so much more sense. And connecting that to Zazen, it's kind of like, all right, don't worry so much about the fact that you've got these thoughts going boing, 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 boing. Just give them a little space. They'll slow down. I was like, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Lorna. I mean, that I don't know, that's just what my idea of what he was talking about. So I'm glad it was helpful. I don't know if he would agree or disagree, but.
It's the finger pointing at the moon. Okay, Anne, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I had my hand over your image. I couldn't see you were on again. I wondered the analogy about, moving toward and away and with, and the explanations are so amazingly, beautifully compatible with Zen understanding of how dukkha arises. I wondered if the people who started this relational cultural approach, if they had Buddhism as part of their focus. And I also wondered, since it's relational cultural, whether there's another kind of overlay cultural wise to the whole understanding.
Yeah, I had the same thought, and when I was reading it, I was like, I wonder if they've studied Buddhism or that, which led me to kind of Googling it. And sure enough, one of the founders, Janet Surrey, was a big mindfulness practitioner. And I don't know if at the time she was a teacher, but she's now an insight teacher. And she does these, I haven't joined any, but they're on Zoom and they're open to everyone, called maybe insight dialogues. I'm not super familiar with the insight tradition, so maybe this is just a common thing they do. But I'm really curious about them. And in the article, thank you for that reminder too, I'll put into the chat if anyone's interested in reading it. At the end, she's got co-meditation, so you can practice with someone, like attuning to each other's breath. And anyway, so I think that was there. And then, yeah, the cultural piece, that's a big part of it, is kind of the way that culture and socialization and our identities and where we are influence our dukkha, influence the ways we forget interconnectedness and act out of greed, hatred, delusion. Our strategies of disconnection are influenced by our cultural context. That's a big piece of it, for sure. And it started out, Jean Baker Miller was one of the founders, and she wrote this book called A New Psychology of Women, and that kind of turned into RCT. And so it really was first initially formed by women, and then they expanded out and realized, yeah, well, this is really relevant for everyone. And so there's that piece too. I really, in my experience and in my practice, there's a lack of that women's perspective and what women bring, just in our culture, I think, right? It's very patriarchal, and which is another reason I'm just so grateful for Great Tree. It's such a gift, this practice and this community, centering and uplifting women's experiences and voices. It's really impactful. But thank you for the question. It was long-winded. But
I think it's important. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because it's important to consider the cultural impact, because sometimes it's a thing we don't really acknowledge or talk about, which is also why I liked that you called this the you talked about the Western psychology, the Zen and Western psychology, because I think so many theories of psychology are really couched in kind of Western cultural values, and then they don't kind of acknowledge that, which is why it's so helpful to kind of expand your worldview and tackle things from a different perspective. And also, I really did love the metaphor about the goats and the sheep wandering around. And it really made me think of when you watch a cat wandering around. Because if you watch a cat wandering around, it's the most random thing in the world. And just kind of like, I think my brain kind of wanders around like a cat sometimes. And then there's so much pressure in this culture to kind of be productive and to kind of operate in a certain way, and kind of like constrain your brain to a certain kind of way. And so I think I'm really going to take that with me, that idea of kind of sitting with it and letting your mind wander.
thank you, Anne. Anne and Melissa were in the RCT study group and practice group.
Thank you. That was a lovely talk, and there were many points that I'm thinking about. And I was also thinking of that, how I don't give my own mind. I try to give my child and people around me that field, but do I give myself that? I don't know. That's something to sit with. And I love the translation of sama instead of right mindfulness, harmonizing mindfulness, or sorry, harmonizing view, what all the precepts to perceive it as harmonizing instead of right, because I always got hung up on that, because that feels like, yeah, there has to be a definite, a right, but there never really is a right, is there? It's just the practice and our intention of trying to find that. So that was very helpful. Thank you.
Hey Trey, thanks so much. That was awesome. I have a question. See how to say it. So I really appreciate how both RCT and Buddhism point to the truth of interconnectedness and like how we are ultimately not individuals. But I also really liked how your talk was honest about how a lot of times in relationship we have to see the ways that something is being mirrored back to us, and it's like something about ourselves. So I'm curious how I sometimes struggle in my life about, yeah, like, oh, so if that's true, this is mirroring something back about me, then like I sometimes think, oh, before I'm in a relationship, I have to like figure something out on the cushion, kind of figure this out on my own, and then so this won't be mirrored back. Yeah, so I'm curious how, if you struggle with that tension, or how you like approach that in your own life.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But I think and I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but this what I'm hearing and what's coming up for me is this like seeing myself and like maybe unskillful ways of being and how those get reflected back, and how I kind of want to like sort them out before I'm in relationship. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess I get confused about when something's being mirrored back to me, or when I'm like deluded about, like, I'm just being self-critical, and kind of the interplay of that. Like sometimes I just think there's inner critic and I'm like, there's something wrong about me. But other times there is like something going on in the mirroring. And maybe I'm actually answering my own question, because the inner critic is probably that's what that relationship is showing me. But it feels confusing about when to bring things into a relationship and when to kind of process something on my own, like, oh, this is, I'm being mirrored something. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna steal Tejo's teaching and say, your question is your answer. But I think that's a really interesting and important question. What do we bring into relationship? I think what I think about too is like, what's my work to do and what's not, and what work am I taking on that is maybe not mine, and what work is mine to do, and can we trust our relationships and the people around us to reflect that and to be compassionate with us. I think that I get curious about the inner critic and the self-judgment. What purpose does that serve? And during the ceremonies in November, the Jukai, the celebrations of the 100-year celebration, Reb Anderson, this one I remember, Reb Anderson was talking about the precepts, and he's talking about the 10 grave precepts, or great precepts they're sometimes called, of like, these are like the do nots, kind of the refrain from killing, refrain from stealing. These are rough translations. And he would say, upholding the precepts is a cause for compassion, and breaking the precepts is a cause for compassion. And so either, it doesn't matter, what's happening, there's still, can we bring compassion to ourselves and to our relationship and to whatever's happening? Because I think, like, at least in my experience, that compassion, when the compassion is there, that lays the framework and creates space for doing something differently. It's opening, for me, when there's the criticism and the judgment, whether from outside or inside, I want to shut down. It's not as, so if we're thinking about change, wanting to change for whatever reason, I just think about what is helping us do that? Is it the criticism, or is it the compassion, or something else? And I think that, I don't know, this seems to be pretty universal for me too, what you were saying, BI, about, there's something wrong with me. And there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with any of us. We're good just as we are, and getting curious, compassionately curious with that critic that tells us that there is something. And RCT, if we think about RCT, would bring it back to maybe the culture. What in our culture has taught us that something about us is wrong? At least that's where my head goes. But,
thank you.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah, good luck, and let me know what you need, how I can support you. But we're at 11. I really appreciate y'all again, and thank you. I want to apologize, but I'll just say thank you.
Thank you.
So, and this has been recorded and it'll be up on you. Oh, let me put this into the chat. 1 second. And give you a chance to grab it if you'd like. Oh, and I just saw this from Tejo. Thank you. So Shohaku said it. Shohaku said it. If we remember impermanence and interconnectedness, we uphold the precepts, and it's from Dogen's teaching on called the Kyoju Kaimon. So yeah, but this will be recorded, and these Saturday lectures are all up on YouTube. Got some really great. Tejo's gotten some great speakers. And so it's really an honor to be here, like, you know, because yeah, I mean, I encourage y'all to look through the website, and if you scroll to the bottom, you can click on the YouTube icon, and yeah, there's some great talks. Guess we'll give back the merit.
May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
And if you want to know about speakers that are coming up, you can go to our website and get on our mailing list, our email mailing list. Thank you very much, Trey. Have a good day, everyone. And Trey, you get some rest.